Call the meeting to order. The Planning and Zoning Commission is an independent advisory council body of the City of Ames City Council. The Planning and Zoning Commission members are volunteers of the community and not part of the city administration. The Planning and Zoning Commission is supported by staff from the city's planning division. The commission is responsible for recommendations on matters involving subdivisions, annexations, master plans, and major site development plans, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan amendments. We make our recommendations based on city codes, the facts presented, and input from the public. As an advisory commission, we welcome all comments regarding the proposed item. Please direct your input to the commission. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that comments be focused on new information not previously presented. You may speak only once on an agenda item. If you wish to speak, please fill out a speaker information card and present it to the recording secretary. We ask that you come to the microphone to speak so that all comments may be recorded. The order of the proceeding for each item on the agenda will be as follows. City staff will present the staff report regarding the agenda item. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of city staff. The applicant will be invited to make a statement regarding the request. Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Members of the audience will be invited to come forward to offer comments and questions. Once public comment is closed, city staff and the applicant will have an opportunity for concluding remarks. The commission will discuss the application based on all presentations and any comments given, and come to a recommendation for city council. The discussion may include further questions of city staff and the applicant for clarification. And with that, we will move into the first item on the agenda. Introduction of committee members.
Julie Winter.
Mike Clayton.
Mike LaPetra.
Matthew Voss.
Mike Sullivan.
Jim Blickensdorf.
Next item is approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Approval of the minutes of April 2nd, 2025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Now we have the public forum, and come forward and speak on an item that is not on the agenda if you wish. Okay, item number 6 would be the election of officers. So election of the chair for the next year.
Yeah, we usually start with the chair and then we would do a vice chair. So that we'd look for a nomination and then there'd be a vote if once that has been approved as a nomination or accepted.
I would nominate Mike Sullivan for chair.
I second that. Mike, you,
I'm okay. Yeah.
okay.
Whatever people want to do. Yep.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, nomination for a vice chair.
I would nominate Matthew Voss.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right.
Look at that.
So with that,
And painless.
Mike Sullivan will be taking over chair for the rest of the night.
Excellent.
So now you have to move.
Switch
Well, you can probably run the meeting from there if you want.
Okay. So with that, we will then move to item 7 on the agenda, development proposal for 113 North Dakota Avenue, Dakota Towns, including rezoning to residential medium, RM density with a planned unit development, PUD overlay, major site development plan, and a preliminary plat.
Good evening. So as you said, this is a rezoning from residential low density to residential medium density. That includes a request for a planned unit overlay with the rezoning and a major site development plan. Submit it with that PUD. It also includes a preliminary plat. So some background on why these things are being requested. The site that's highlighted on the screen is the subject property. The applicant is proposing to develop the site as townhomes, so single-family attached dwellings. The preliminary plat is being requested so that each unit can be located on a separate lot, which would allow them to be ownership housing if desired. The preliminary plat isn't necessary to approve the development layout. They don't have to have those internal lot lines. So I just wanted to note that's the reasoning behind this preliminary plat that's breaking up the 20 units onto 20 separate lots. As for the rezoning, residential medium density is desired here to allow single-family attached housing rather than detached housing that's allowed in RL, the current zoning district, as well as increased densities to allow the 20-unit townhomes. That rezoning is being accompanied with the PUD overlay. And the PUD overlay is necessary for two reasons. City Council mandated the PUD overlay be part of this request because of environmentally sensitive areas on the property. The north portion of the property has steep slopes down to a ravine that leads to Clear Creek, as well as the future land use designation. So the future land use designation for the site is urban corridor. That designation is new. It wasn't a previous designation we had in the land use policy plan that preceded Ames Plan 2040. And as a new designation, we have not yet written an implementing zoning district for it. So when the applicant came to us with this request, we considered what the UC designation goals and guidelines were for development. It mainly focuses on commercial or mixed use development with the goal of intensifying those types of development along the Lincoln Way corridor. As you can see, the subject property does not have frontage on Lincoln Way. It has frontage on North Dakota, where access will be taken from. And given that limitation, as well as other site constraints, the allowance for some residential development within UC seemed to be a more appropriate direction for the site. So the applicant inquired to City Council about the UC designation and doing a residential medium density development, and council made a determination that that could be appropriate if there was a master plan and a planned unit development that accompanied it. And that just ensures that the site's layout for parking, circulation, protection of environmentally sensitive areas, and design features are compatible both with the UC designation and the surrounding area. So with that background on what these separate requests are, I'll go into some of the site layout features. There we go. So this is the site plan for the site. So you can see while this site plan is oriented this way on your screen, north is actually on the left-hand side of your screen. So the buildings are aligned along two east-west streets. There is one access onto North Dakota, and there's an internal connection. You can also see at the west end of the northernmost street, there's 5 guest parking spaces, but otherwise the driveways up to the townhomes would accommodate 2 parked cars, as well as 2 car garages that are on the bottom floor of the townhomes. In terms of pedestrian circulation, while there's only one vehicular access onto North Dakota, at the end of the street, it is Brook Hollow, the southernmost street. The sidewalk actually extends past the street and provides a second pedestrian connection to North Dakota as well. So while this is an infill site, as we touched on, there are steep slopes on the property. As you can see, the northern half of the site, it's hard to see, but there is a line that's indicated easement. That is a slope protection easement. It's approximately 12,500 square feet and it exceeds our common open space set-aside requirements for planned unit developments. So with this easement netted out, the density of the site is 14.25 units for the residential medium density, which is actually a gross density. We require between 7.26 and no more than 22 units per acre. So we're within the density guidelines of the residential medium density zoning district here. So again, with the planned unit development, The idea behind it is that certain deviations from zoning can be granted if compatibility standards and design requirements are met. So those deviations are typically setbacks and lot sizes. So on this site, one of the main deviations that's requested is the front property line setback with North Dakota. So this is an external front property line. Typically, we'd require 25 feet setback for buildings. The applicant has requested an 8-foot setback. I will note, if you can kind of see, the sidewalk here is pretty far forward from the actual property line, about 8 feet farther forward, where typically, on a typical residential site, the sidewalk might be 1 foot off the property line. So really, from the sidewalk, the buildings will be located at a 16-foot setback. So we won't be right up against North Dakota here. On the topic of external property lines, the PUD doesn't allow variation in other setbacks of external property lines that are abutting other properties. So the side setbacks and the rear setbacks are abutting other properties, so those setbacks have to be met. Because of the orientation of the site off of North Dakota, the rear property line is actually the west property line. So that's where a 25-foot setback applies. And then the others are side property lines. So the units will meet a 10-foot side external setback from the south property line and of course, the north property line. But most of the other deviations are internal to the site. So that could be on corner lots, a deviation to reduce the setback of one of the corner units from the private drive, deviations in the rear internal setbacks of the units. So while they all do have some green space on the lots, some of the rears are smaller and accommodate just a deck instead of a full 25-foot setback. So that's one of the requested deviations. And the minimum lot sizes, these are more postage stamp sized lots to accommodate this style of development. So the typical townhome lot sizes are also part of the deviation request. Other things to note with the PUD, so the front property lines of the units with North Dakota have an additional stoop that will encroach 3 feet. This is allowed under our zoning code already. But we wanted to note that it is an encroachment on top of the deviation that is requested. So there will be a 3-foot overhang for a covered stoop. And then on the southernmost units, and I'll show you architectural drawings here in a minute so you can visualize this better. There are also decks on each unit. The decks will encroach 3 feet on the required side yard setback there. Typically, we would allow that for a feature that cantilevers, but because the decks have posts, they don't fall under that encroachment allowance in the zoning ordinance. So we're asking with the PUD for that encroachment of the decks with the posts to expressly be allowed to encroach up to 3 feet on that 10-foot setback, as it otherwise would be if it was, a balcony or a stairwell or something of that nature. So let's look at the architectural plans, because again, with the planned unit development, we have to meet certain compatibility standards. So the left elevation here is the elevation that will face North Dakota. The wall, the mass here, will be broken up with shrubs. But again, the main elements that have interface with the street are this covered stoop, as well as this change in material. The units on both the fronts that face into the private streets, as well as the rears, will have change in material and relief as well. The change in relief, this kind of cantilevered section does add some additional windows and fenestration with the sliding doors. And of course, we have these decks that are on the backs of all of the units. And those decks are 6 feet in width. The posts are positioned at 4.5 feet. With this proposal, the applicant is also requesting an alternative landscape plan So typically when we have private streets, we require street trees at a rate of 1 tree for every 30 to 50 feet. So for this site, it's about 14 trees. With, the deviations and the setbacks and other constraints of the site, the applicant was able to fit about 5 trees positioned throughout the site along the streets, as well as 2 trees near the guest parking area and some additional landscaping to help with screening along the guest parking area. But the rest of the trees were positioned around the northern homes to provide additional screening of both the parking area and these homes and a retaining wall that will be located to the north of those northernmost units. So with this application, there was neighborhood outreach the applicant organized. In general, the feedback at a neighborhood meeting in December of last year was concern about, could this just be developed under the RL zone or left as open space? And I think, you all have received some emails. I think the main concerns are probably the impacts on the view shed from tree removal that's required to site these buildings. The view of, it is a 3-story townhome that will be 33, and a half feet tall. It is, a little bit higher, 10, 15 feet higher in elevation than the houses on the other side of the ravine. You can see these 4 lots are contain dwellings, and the dwellings are about over 100 feet on the other side of a ravine from the property and the development area. So those are some of the main concerns. Other concerns at the neighborhood meeting that the applicant addressed with their submittal were stormwater management. How will stormwater be handled from the site? So this site doesn't actually meet our threshold to require a full stormwater management plan. Under Ames City Code, they're not adding enough impervious area, which is you have to add an acre of impervious area to be required to submit a stormwater management plan. But they did still submit a stormwater memo to show how runoff would be directed from the site. It'll be directed east towards North Dakota. They showed us the rates, and Public Works did review that and determined that the city stormwater system will be able to handle that, and it was satisfactory. They did also submit a tree survey, as well as a natural resource inventory that, again, mainly just showed the resources on the site as the trees. And I will also note that the neighbors did submit a protest, which will require City Council to have a supermajority to approve the project. That does not impact your vote tonight, or what majority is required for the project at the Planning and Zoning Commission to make a recommendation to council. It just does impact the council's vote, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. So with that, staff has found that this request meets the standards of the PUD, the deviations have been identified, and the rezoning is consistent with our Ames Plan 2040 designation and the underlying RM requested designation, with the enhancements that are provided and this infill opportunity along the Lincoln Way corridor. Further, the proposal furthers the city's goals for infill and diverse housing options by creating these townhomes. So with that, we are recommending alternative 1, which is approval of the rezoning, the planned unit development, the major site development plan, and the preliminary plat. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for city staff?
I guess one quick clarifying question on the deviation for the landscaping requirement. Could you just review that again? Because I missed those details in the packet. It was,
The
I think,
alternative landscape plan?
yes, I believe you said that it should have 14 street trees and they were
Yes.
proposing 5.
So they're proposing 14 trees
Okay.
on the site as a whole. What the alternative landscape plan is doing is allowing the relocation of those trees instead of along the private streets. 9 will be relocated to the northern part of the property to provide screening for the parking lot and those northern units.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Just to be clear, as attached single family, there's not mandatory site landscaping. It's the private street that says you must propose a street tree plan, much like a large public street would have. So that's hard to fit with townhomes. That's why they're situating them the way they are. It's not like an apartment where you have site landscaping that you must incorporate into the plan.
I just had a question about the slope stability easement. I'm not real familiar with that. I guess it's good to see that the stormwater is not being directed that way. Are there any concerns about during construction or with proximity of those northern units about slope stability issues with that?
There is a retaining wall proposed on that side of the site that will be reviewed by our inspections division,
Okay.
for footings and that kind of thing. But in terms of erosion, that really, the retaining wall and then some other site features that will slow runoff. So rock check dams and other stormwater best management practices, I think will help address any erosion concerns.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for city staff?
I think we heard some concerns just from the emails regarding some of the deviations and setback that are being allowed based on the PUD. I did also look to see the easements. My particular question is related to North Dakota and that easement, or the setback there. The proposal is for 8 feet when 25 foot is the standard. Can staff walk us through any background of how this site plan was developed? Because it does seem like that's local folks are raising some concern about that. So I guess just knowing
Sure.
where that came from
Sure.
might be helpful.
You know, I think this being an infill site, first off, we do want street interface. And so a reduced setback does help us have a walk-up townhome in this area, which is part of our urban corridor designation goals for, an enhanced multimodal corridor. So the setback does help in that regard. I will note that something that did change through this process, initially there were 2 accesses onto North Dakota, and there was no internal street connection. There were concerns raised at the neighborhood meeting about the southern access would have to be right in, right out because of the turn lane that was there. And how could that be controlled? There would need to be a median put in. And so this layout was proposed instead that has that internal street connection, which does add width to the development. So I would say that's
Gotcha.
something that probably also contributed to that request. But the walk-up townhome and units are something that is desired by the PUD and part of the reason why external setbacks just for front property lines are allowed to be deviated from.
Okay. I guess as a piggyback on that too, on the south side, side yard setback, I noticed that it's kind of an oddly shaped lot there. It's a rectangle. Different site owners, at least according to Beacon, based on this parcel versus the other. Do we think that by allowing that side yard setback to be so tight on the south side of the parcel that that's going to hinder any future development concerns on the south adjacent parcel?
So if there were not, lot lines, internal lot lines with the preliminary plat, 10 feet would be required there just under the base zoning district. And they are exceeding that with the buildings. They are at about 13 feet.
Okay.
But there's no code that says the use of the property adjacent to you limits how you like there's no relationship to if that was a 5 foot or a 10 foot setback on this lot or 20 foot setback, the other lot has to meet its own standards.
Correct.
So there's no direct correlation to a setback on this site to the property to the south about its usability.
That's true.
It's a very small site. I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but what happens here does not affect what they're allowed to do on that property.
I guess my only reasoning behind that was whether there would be, and maybe this is not the subject of our discussion tonight, but I I was thinking that that would be a 25-foot setback there, which in case they would also be doing a PUD for that particular lot. But if it is 10 foot on the base, then perhaps that's okay, because then you have the encroachment that we're dealing with for
Yeah.
the porches. And then if you start to deal with another special exception that we'd be talking about on that south lot, and you already have, but I understand Kelly's point there as
Yeah,
well.
that
so.
to your point, that south lot is not permitted to have access on Lincoln Way, so that wouldn't be the front, which would mean that that property line would probably also be a side. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Just to go back to the setback on North Dakota for a second. So I just want to make sure you have the numbers right. So we have an 8-foot setback from the property line to the homes, but then it's another 8 feet between the property line and the sidewalk.
Yes. Let me zoom in on this for you. Oops. So for instance, you can see this unit. Do you see this arrow? It's marked as 11 feet here. So they're at varying setbacks. This one's at 13 feet. And then as you can see, just for scale, like the sidewalk is 5 feet in width. So yes, there's more than 5 feet between the property line and the sidewalk. But yes, for some flexibility, a minimum of 8 feet is the requested building to property line for each of those end units.
Any other questions for city staff? Okay. With that, this is the opportunity for the applicant to come up and make a statement regarding the request if the applicant's here. Oh, here we go. Thanks.
Good evening, members of the Planning Zoning Commission. Congratulations on the new election as chairs.
Oh, yeah,
supervisors.
thanks.
City staff and members of the public. My name is Luke Jensen. I represent RES Development at 2519 Chamberlain. We are a local development company with close to 30 years of experience in Ames and Central Iowa. I'm the project lead for the proposed project at 113 North Dakota, also referred to as the Dakota Towns. I want to begin with thanking the commission for the opportunity to present our project and share our vision of how it can positively contribute to the growth and vitality of the city of Ames. Our proposal, which was well outlined in the staff report, is for 20 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhomes, each with an attached 2-car garage, as well as a patio or deck off the back. These will, each home will be on their own lot. This project is designed with the idea of complementing the surrounding neighborhood as addressed identified community needs for new housing stock at a reasonably affordable price point for new construction. We've worked very closely with the city staff to ensure the project aligns with the new 2040 comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance, the PUD guidelines, and other design elements, while also incorporating feedback from the nearby residents and stakeholders. Some of the project's highlights include the sensitivity and development in regards to product type versus and density. I think the project shows that the density of this as proposed is right in the middle of what's allowable, somewhere between 7 units and 22 units. I believe the staff report outlined 14.26 units per acre there. Practical and efficient use of existing infrastructure on a prime and underutilized development corner at Lincoln Way in North Dakota. We've worked hard to maintain a buffer between the neighbors to the north, with additional tree plantings, as well as not disturbing the steep slopes to the north. Lastly, this will provide a new type of housing for the community. That's something that we hear over and over again, is more product variety, and this project is an answer for that. We believe the development represents a meaningful investment in the future of Ames and bringing new opportunities while respecting the character and history of the area. We welcome any questions, or I welcome any questions that you have, and look forward to working with you, the council, and the community as we move forward with this process. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Does anyone have any questions for or comments for the applicant?
Just for curiosity's sake, I know it was mentioned that this was set up to be able to have ownership of the properties. Do you anticipate primarily ownership or rentals of these units?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I think it could be both. We've developed other PUDs in the community, and they've had a mix of ownership and rental. So I think the focus I want to have is this is new supply housing for the community, and not differentiate between renter or owner occupied at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, at this time, we allow members of the audience to come forward and offer comments on this agenda item if they wish.
My name is Liz Block. I live at 4618 West Bend Drive. When that first became our address, our son was 8 and our daughter was 5. Today, that son is 53 and that daughter is 50. Although our kids have flown and my husband has passed away, I still enjoy the beauty of our tree-lined neighborhood on the West Bend and the friendship of my neighbors, several of whom have lived there longer than I have. Certainly, we predate the 2040 plan and the urban corridor. Our street is pretty quiet and our homes and yards are very pleasant and welcoming. The old guard is enjoying the younger families who've moved in. The natural jewel of our neighborhood is our woods, stretching from Lincoln Way to our West Bend homes and from North Dakota to South Bend. These woods provide a spatial, sound, and visual barrier between our houses and the traffic of North Dakota, the gas station and apartment houses across Lincoln Way, and the massive, ugly, and disastrously placed apartment building which looms across North Dakota. Clearly, we are eternally grateful for the camouflage provided by the intervening woodland. I think all of the houses on West Bend that border the woods display structural modifications that enhance our exposure to the forest. We have added decks, sun porches, walkways, and big windows to better take advantage of our southern view. We are truly neighbors to the woods and all the creatures who find sanctuary there. As the woods have matured over these years, we've seen an ever-increasing number and variety of songbirds, owls, hawks, squirrels, chipmunks, possums, rabbits, foxes, raccoons, and deer. A mama raccoon had her babies in our chimney. Last summer, I became friends with a lady who pushed her child in a stroller to the edge of the trees to take pictures of a family of barred owls. Dog walkers from other neighborhoods leave their own apartments to walk along our quieter street. Morel mushroom hunters share space with squirrels who bury walnuts and acorns that will grow into the next generation of trees. Years ago, a fat woodchuck lumbered into our yard to feast on the fermented apples on the ground, growing pretty drunk in the process. My teenage son and his friends discovered him lying on his back in the sun, sleepy and content, oblivious to the gentle attempts of the boys to roll him upright. These are things that happen when you are blessed to live by a woods. Mr. Jensen has stated many times in his proposal that he will save as many trees as possible, but look at the site plan. There's 20 townhouses, driveways, sidewalks, parking areas, and restraining walls that will cover the site minus whatever trees are in the steep-sided ravine. His plan calls for the removal of about 50 mature trees to be replaced by the addition of about 14 new trees. But we all know that these replacement trees are basically just big sticks that hardly act as visual screens, much less homes for critters. I might add that the wooded property adjoining the town's development is owned by my partner and former neighbor Jennifer Wan and myself. Our families bought our portion of the woods in 2007 in order to protect ourselves and our neighbors from this type of development. Our neighborhood has no pocket park. This is our green space. We object to having a 3-story, 20 townhouse development built so close to the lot lines of our property. We're trying to preserve the character of our tree-lined neighborhood. Our hope is that for years to come, our friends and neighbors can continue to enjoy our street-to-street woodland. You're welcome to stroll that area and see for yourself. Keep an eye out for that woodchuck, though. He's probably sober by now.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Don Eichner. My wife Mary and I live at 4538 West Bend Drive. The parcel of land that Mr. Jensen wants to rezone is presently, it's directly behind us. He wants to rezone it low density and, like I say, behind our property. We bought the lot and built a home in 1974, which I think makes us the longest living people in the neighborhood. And because of the unique qualities of the neighborhood, along with the privacy and beauty of the trees and woods in the area, the trees behind our lot on the south side of the ravine provide a buffer for us and the neighborhood. Some of you might remember Bob Buck. He designed and built many of the homes in the West Bend area. Each home tends to fit well on a lot, and many are tucked in between large oaks that were part of the original Litzel Farm property. I spoke with Mr. Buck a few years back, and he said, I did everything possible to save as many trees as possible, and he did just that and was very proud of the development. The woods and ravine behind our property provide a beautiful view from our back porch. In addition, they provide a home and food for many animals that live in the ravines and surrounding areas. We see deer on a year-round basis, and as they travel through the neighborhood and often bed down in the winter on the slope of the ravine. The woods are also home to a lot of birds and squirrels and other animals. I will note that the deer are quite fond of our shrubs and flowers, but it's kind of a small price to pay. The woods are an important part of this neighborhood, and one of the reasons that people buy homes here. Ames just received a Tree City Award, a U.S. status award, and it's the second since 1983, as I understand it. Many of the trees to be removed are large oaks on the far side of the ravine. After what seems to be clear cutting, we will be left to look at a retaining wall and 3-story townhomes. This will dramatically change our landscape and our privacy. And I'd ask, how does that comply with us being designated a tree city? Before this approval process goes any further, I would ask you to come and walk the area. And see for yourself how many beautiful trees are on the chopping block. I walked the area again last week, and I'd be happy to provide you with a guided tour. Around 25 or more of the old growth oak trees are supposed to be cut. Is that what we want in a city designated as a tree city? If I were the developer, I would be ashamed to destroy such a beautiful site. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Megan Stevenson, and I'm a registered nurse here in Ames. I have lived in Ames for over 20 years and reside currently at 4530 West Bend, an adjoining property to the 113 North Dakota Avenue. My family and I purchased this home in 2023. I'm very concerned with the proposed development on several accounts, some of which will be addressed by my neighbors tonight. On this note, my husband and I have also submitted to you a letter outlining our concerns. Now, currently, both south-facing and north-facing properties along West Bend Drive have a forested view shed due to the significant slope of West Bend. The proposed development will create a prominent artificial skyline, and remove the unobstructed view shed, which is a property value enhancement for the homes in our neighborhood. Ames even states on its website that trees increase property value. Such backyard views are uncommon in Ames and highly sought after, and I'm very concerned that the property value of adjacent single-family homes, mine included, will be significantly harmed with this development. In addition, the proposal indicates that 47 trees, more than a dozen of which are century-old oak trees and provide almost all of the canopy coverage for this property, will be cut down. Ames needs to be a good steward to the trees that were here before the city. Now, medium-density residential limits building heights to 4 stories. Furthermore, the 4 3-story attached townhomes on the north end of the property will sit on top of a 10-foot high retaining wall that is upslope from my existing property. These 3-story buildings on top of that 10-foot retaining wall are functionally going to appear to me as more than a 4-story building. Tall buildings perched on the edge of a ravine do not meet City Code Section 29.11146C regarding massing, and I quote, "Multifamily buildings proposed abutting single-family or 2-family buildings should be of a scale, massing, and window proportions and architectural style that is compatible with the abutting lower-density residential development." And despite the variations in exterior materials proposed to break up the massing, again, a 3-story, 4-attached unit on the north end of the lot atop of a 10-foot high and 120-foot long retaining wall is not an architectural style that's going to be compatible with the adjacent properties of single-family 1- and 2-story homes. My husband and I lived for 17 years at 515 East 13th Street. I don't expect you to be familiar with that property. It is a split-level home with a large floor-to-ceiling living room window that looks directly across the street to a very large, very long, and very ugly retaining wall. Every day for 17 years, I looked out my window at that retaining wall. Over the last 5 years of those 17 years, my husband and I saved diligently to purchase a home on a wooded lot in a wooded neighborhood. And I often found myself driving through the West Bend neighborhood, hoping that the right property would come up on the market. And it did. A beautiful mid-century modern home built in the 70s with many large floor-to-ceiling windows facing the south to bring the outdoors in, as is the mid-century modern way. And now, today, I find myself in the position that a developer wants to put up a 6 to 10-foot, 100-foot long retaining wall directly across my home, all so he can cram as many units as possible onto this property. Thank you.
Chair, I just want to remind you, the commission has decorum rules for these hearings. There's not supposed to be general applause and actions by the members of the public. It's supposed to be the speaker interacting with the commission.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Justin Landheis. I live at 212 West Bend Circle. The main reason we moved to the West Bend neighborhood was because it is encompassed by the high-quality forest matrix of the Clear Creek watershed. As someone with an environmental science and forestry background, I have been following this proposal with great concern. It is easy to take for granted our natural canopy in Ames, especially this well-preserved oak woodland, which is a rapidly disappearing ecotype and top bird and pollinator habitat. The proposed development will have an outsized impact on the aesthetic and physical canopy of West Ames. As has been mentioned, many of the oaks slated for removal are well over 100 years old. There aren't really any young oaks on the property, predating any development in West Ames, and some are likely approaching 200 years of age, given their circumference, height, and canopy spread. The water holding capacity of a mature oak woodland is huge, and going from local old-growth hardwoods to scraped impervious surface with no water holding ability is a shock that the localized slope and banks downstream in Clear Creek can't handle. I've been in Munn Woods, Emma McCarthy Lee Park, and Pamela Woods for over 15 years, and I've watched the city battle failing stream banks repeatedly over that time. So I doubt when they say that the stream can handle this increased capacity. This proposed development will put unnecessary pressure on a precariously steep slope and an already overburdened and flashy creek that threatens infrastructure the city pays expensively to maintain. The retaining wall is likely to become a nick point from which the slope can rapidly erode, and that's likely to happen in short order. Additionally, the Greenbelt connectivity from west to central Ames is important to maintain as a wildlife movement corridor, and this dense development will be a barrier to this movement, as this is prominent green space that's sorely missing in West Ames, right next to a busy intersection. Of note as well, the surrounding properties aren't vacant, as has been stated at points throughout this. They are generously held in their naturally vegetated state for the well-being of the neighborhood and the entire city, because everyone sits at that intersection for several light cycles. In summary, this proposed development is too dense. It's on too steep of a slope, especially considering the new climactic events we seem to be having every year, where we cannot even plan for the increased rainfall. And the site alteration as proposed will have a devastating point source and downstream effects. If anyone has ever been in Munn Woods, you can tell that the stream banks are rapidly collapsing in there. The committee should reject the proposal as it goes against the Tree City USA program and the Bird and Pollinator Initiative, as oaks are literally the #1 bird and pollinator habitat. And this oak woodland, we may see large oak trees throughout the city, but having this many together in one space is quite rare. And this does not even meet the goals of an urban corridor under the 2040 plan. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Erica Smith. I live at 4923 West Bend Drive. I have lived in this neighborhood for just over, I guess a year and a half now, since November 2023. So my concerns are largely not the ones I was asked to come to speak to you guys about. My big concerns are things about the trees, the changing character to the neighborhood, watershed, but in line with our community vision of Ames, Iowa as a forward-thinking community, I'm here to talk with you about forward-thinking traffic. So, sorry, that was a joke that fell flat. Yes, so pulling forward here. Yeah, the request for me was to talk a little bit to you guys tonight about traffic. We're going to have across these 20 units, probably 20 to 30 cars easily on this property. You guys are all familiar with this intersection. It's a well-known intersection here in Ames, very hilly, icy in winter, and it has a opposite, almost directly opposite, not exactly opposite, just slightly offset, the exit from the core development across the street, also pulling out onto Lincoln Way. So we're going to talk about 20 to 30 cars needing to pull in and out of this driveway onto with a 22-foot driveway, which is about what you need for a 2-car driveway. But with the sightline issues, we're going to be removing a lot of trees for this development, so some of the sightline issues are going to be addressed. We're still going to have some major sightline issues. So for those of us who live in the neighborhood, I know from talking with my neighbors that many of us avoid the intersection of West Bend Drive with North Dakota in winter because of issues with that intersection. And we're now, most of us will pull around and exit onto South Bend Drive, where we're exiting onto a flat road, a street that is not hilly and doesn't have a grade. Here, there's going to be no option to pull anywhere out except for onto this very hilly, icy grade in the winter. I have children who walk dogs and ride bikes around the neighborhood. I'm concerned about them and other kids with the combination of traffic pulling out of here and everything else going on. So yeah, just one more little concern. So the combination of the ice, the hills, the visibility, it's just going to make it hard for all of the residents living there and feel a little perilous to them every time they're needing to pull out of their new homes. Thank you.
My name's Ryan Lilith Jeffrey. I live at 234 Park Ridge Drive, Circle. As I said in my letter, The sheer number of variances requested here to code indicate this is not a good fit for this site. More than that, it's using the PUD to straight up make a mockery of city zoning ordinances. It is requesting a variance for literally every numerical restriction in the zoning category. That's just not a reasonable use of this. The PUD is designed to create creative and careful use of the land such that it can make minor adjustments in order to accommodate fitting in better with the neighborhood and fitting in better with the lot. This does the opposite. Instead, it uses it to ignore every possible rule and fit as many units on the area as is humanly possible. The density, they talk about, oh, the density is in the middle. The density is in the middle if you consider the entire property. If you ignore the non-developable steep parts of the property, you're at approximately 20 units on a single acre. Just a hair over a single acre, you're cramming 20 units on it. It's too dense. This property cannot, should not support this many units. I'm pro infill. I want townhomes on this property, actually. I'm different than many of the people in my neighborhood on that front. I think townhomes are a great fit for it. If it was me developing it, I would probably put 6 to 8. Total, I think it can probably support, if you're willing to sacrifice a lot of trees, probably 12. 20 is too many. They say they're trying to preserve all of the trees, or as many trees as humanly possible, and yet they're proposing cutting one down that's not even directly on the property. It's in the median zone between the sidewalk and the property. That's a 100+ year oak tree that isn't actually directly impacting a single unit or part of the property. There's no active effort to preserve a single tree on this property. It is trying to cram as many units into as little area as is possible, and it's completely outside of the nature of the neighborhood and does not deserve to be built as shown. The reduced gap from North Dakota, the setback gap, they say that that's already larger than standard residential. This isn't a residential street. This is a major arterial. It's not a residential street. It naturally has a larger setback, and they're proposing to encroach on that. Not even using a standard residential place, they're putting 3 stories. How many 3-story houses are there in Ames? Not many, and certainly none that are only 8 feet from their property line. These variances are unreasonable and have no place in our neighborhood. I strongly urge you to reject the plan as given and tell Mr. Jensen to go back and redo a plan that actually fits the property and the neighborhood, and come back to you with a good plan for townhomes that support infill in a creative, functional way that does well by the lot and the neighborhood. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna be that guy. I brought a visual aid. My name is Matt Stevenson. I live at 4530 West Bend, adjacent to the proposed development. I'm a triple grad of ISU. I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in wildlife ecology. And so while my arguments tonight are mostly going to be focused on the appropriateness of the zoning that was requested, I can't stand up here and not also make a plea for the trees. Using the tree inventory provided, which Amelia kindly sent me today, so not all the neighbors had sort of the most accurate numbers. There are 17 oak trees on the property that I estimate to be older than 100 years. The largest 6 are somewhere around 200 years. These trees are likely from the first generation that started regrowing after settlers clear-cut every large tree in the state. An old growth oak grove of this size and age is rare, and this lot
is the best example I know in the city and maybe in the county. To quote a colleague that I was talking with this about in the Natural Resource Department, cutting them down would be a damn shame. The Ames 2040 plan identifies the proposed parcel as an opportunity area for the new urban corridor land use. However, the plan lists the only compatible zoning as Lincoln Way mixed use overlay. The medium density residential with a planned unit development, or PUD overlay, that Mr. Jensen is proposing is inappropriate, as the 2040 plan has already identified the zoning that the city wants for this area. This is an important distinction because the purposes listed for an urban corridor are much narrower and more focused than the intentionally flexible purposes of a PUD. The goals given for the urban corridor are to respect past development patterns, enhance the street environment, and redevelop oversized parking lots, vacant buildings, and underused sites. The 2040 plan also provides guidance that an urban corridor should be of an intensity and density appropriate for the context of the area. As we have heard tonight, the proposal does none of these things. If the staff and the commissioners are not troubled by Mr. Jensen requesting an entirely different zoning than outlined in the exhaustively planned 2040 plan, then I will point out that this proposal doesn't even meet the criteria of a PUD. The municipal code that establishes the PUD overlay requires that it maintains a minimum of 10% of the development as high quality open space for common use, and that it be readily accessible by the residents. The only open space identified is a steep ravine on the other side of a 120-foot long, 10-foot high retaining wall. And so nobody else has gotten to this, so I'm going to just take a moment to point it out. This is the retaining wall on the north side of the property. It goes along almost all of the units. It starts at 0 feet here, then increases to 6, and then it increases to 10. My house and my neighbor's house look right at this 10-foot section. That's a huge area of concrete. This doesn't sound readily accessible to me. How are people going to get to that common space? The establishing code for a PUD also requires context sensitivity, which the people who know the context best have already established is lacking. To quote the staff report for this proposal, in order to grant the deviations, the PUD compatibility standards are required to be met. Given the extreme flexibility afforded under a PUD, the city must hold developers to the stated purpose of the overlay, or else it amounts to a get out of zoning free card. Mr. Jensen is proposing an awkward, cramped rental complex in the middle of a beloved forest. His proposal to cram 20 units into 1.5 acres over the stumps of ancient oak trees squeezed up against the neighbors comes off as greedy overreach. A medium density PUD is the wrong zoning for this parcel, and it would fail to meet the requirements even if it were. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments from the audience? Okay, well, with that, we'll close the public comment period, and then we will open it up to city staff and the applicant if they have any concluding remarks. Do we have any?
I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I mean, the applicant should have rebuttal first, then staff would only respond to questions from the commission.
Okay. Would the applicant like to make any concluding remarks? Okay. So any questions for city staff?
So a question about the zoning district height requirements for the PUD. Do we know what that is? It says in the packet that the zoning district height requirements shall apply to a building with 100 feet of the abutting lot.
Yes.
Talk about the height requirements and how that relates to the adjoining residents.
Yeah, in the RM base zone, it is 50 feet or 4 stories, whichever is lower.
I think the comment from the last gentleman about the open space was well taken. What considerations was there in this process for the open space and the space on the north end of the property? And was there any consideration given to facilitating more open space in the interior that's accessible?
I think, I mean, the applicant could address this, but I think the issue is the code is not well designed for a townhome project. It just is not. It's something that we've been adding to the code. There's things that need to be done to update that. When the applicant switched to a platted project with individual ownership opportunities, even though they may not be, the open space became yard space. So in the sense of creating a townhome with yard space rather than having additional open space in the middle of the site, staff thought that was a trade-off within the PUD that was fine. I understand the ratio of 10% of open space and readily accessible, but that was a evolution of the project through the process. When we first saw it, there were not lot lines and there was more common open space, but then we did see the plat come in, and we, again, making individual lots was changed how some of those calculations worked at the end.
So if we include the yard space, is there any, do you have any number, any estimate for what kind of open space that would entail if the yard space were included in that calculation?
Yes. 1 second.
You're asking if the private yard space was added to the
It's
other common open space, what the total would be?
41.5% of the site.
Okay. Thank you.
41.
And so just to clarify then, the yard space, if we could zoom in a little bit on the site map. I see that we have different lots that are numbered, and then we have the yard space. Like, for example, I'm looking at lot 13, and then I see to the, well, we're flipped. So the south of where it's labeled lot 13, there's yard space. Is that part of a parcel, or is that considered common space to the development? If you look at lot 13 and then to the right of it, there's...
Yes, so the dark line down the center in between lot 13 and lot 10 is that property line, is lot 13's property line.
I see. Okay.
So
the yard space is included
the yard
in the
space
actual
is
lot size.
included.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. And so with that yard space that Matthew mentioned, then it's 40-some percent.
41.5,
Okay.
yeah. I will say, looking at lot 13, that has one of the larger green spaces on the site. The northern lots do have smaller green space on that site, but they do all include those deck features as well. And common open space in our code is further defined as active or passive recreation space. So with that deck feature, overlooking that other open space.
And then the PUD kicks in a higher expectation if you have 50 units. So I think the scale of the project is part of the evaluation. It's not saying a 20-unit project doesn't need open space, but at 50, it does kick in a higher expectation of active open space being part of the project. Just to give you some context to how that's written in the PUD ordinance. I
guess just a general comment I have that maybe we could address, maybe the developer could address at some point, but I know we're hearing a lot about the density of the site, and 20 units is too much. I'm sure that fewer lots were considered in this, but I'd be curious if anybody knows if it's feasible to have a development in this case with fewer lots to help with these setback issues at all. I don't know if city staff could speak to that at all with this.
I would not speak to that. That's a developer should, which does bring up a question. Is the public hearing closed?
Yes.
So we are probably not in a position to evaluate the range of units that are viable on the site in the sense of economically how the developer would approach it.
Right.
Multiple iterations were reviewed by staff. We talked about 2 driveways, a version that had some units fronting along North Dakota. So the front doors were facing North Dakota in a row. And then ultimately this was the configuration that met access constraints and what other elements the developer was looking to achieve to make the project marketable. So this is how we got to where we are.
And I guess the only reason why I go down that path is because that could influence how commission might suggest an alternative. Certainly we wouldn't want to suggest something that would kill any project, but just curious what the feasibility is of different configurations and different numbers. So.
Are there any other questions for city staff? Or any other discussion? Okay. Is there anyone that would like to make a motion?
Do you want to point out you're technically going to make 2 motions, one for the rezoning and one for the plat? So the site plan of the PUD is going to be the one to approve the PUD. You have to approve the site plan. That's going to be the first motion. And then the second motion that you entertain would be to approve the preliminary plat, which creates the lot lines. Theoretically, it could be built without a preliminary plat, so they could stand independently.
Right. And that's outlined in the alternatives in the packet, right? Yep.
I mean, I'll just say I'm somewhat inclined to defer action for the reason that, as Julie was talking about, I think some more information about some of the other alternatives, layouts, if there are options for slightly less density here. I think that townhomes are a creative use of this property, and I think it would be a worthwhile addition to the community, but I think it would be worthwhile to get some more information, some more consideration, I guess.
I tend to agree with you. I think the density is extreme, and I find it difficult to see how it's compatible with the existing units, both the materials of construction and the scale of the project. And I don't know, but I wonder if there couldn't be a better plan to mobilize the construction in a different way to save some of the old growth that's on the site, to further mitigate some of the residents' concerns.
I would say what Matt references, I guess, is option 4, which is to defer action. If you do go that route, I would urge you, if possible, to be specific about what you're asking for. The applicant has no obligation to redesign the project, but you can ask for additional information. And if they choose to present that back to you at an upcoming meeting, that's going to be their choice. But I think specifics is better than what else could you do.
I think for me at least, in terms of specifics, I'd be interested in some of the previous iterations on the layout of the site. You know, with the addition of, I mean, I know.
I would caution you, again, there's no obligation to show you 4 ways to build on the property.
Right.
So
I know.
it should be directed towards changes to this plan that you're interested in the developer responding to. Does that make more sense? That I think it has to be
I
in
think-
relation to the plan that's presented, not can you show me another plan?
I would piggyback on that and say I do have some, at the very least, visual site concerns about the east side of the parcel as well as the south side of the parcel. So related to, the east side and the south side, I think that's correct. And that's where my concern lies as far as density goes. If we're packing too much on this parcel, and the general response, if any, that the developer would care to provide for getting those setbacks back further. When we look at the development on the opposite side of the street, it's set back the normal 25 feet, I believe. And I believe that that's also a medium density. Is that correct?
It's RH, it's high density.
That's high density. Okay. Or I guess at minimum, if we are doing medium density with a PUD overlay, how could we ask the developer to address meeting those expectations without additional PUD? That would be my recommendation. If we were to provide direction to it. I don't know if anybody has any other comments on that.
I think the lot sizes on the north, the 4 units of the north, don't really give anything in the back that's usable.
I think I'd echo and expand on Julie's points, especially the frontage on North Dakota. I know some efforts were made to provide design elements that would make it more compatible, but at least given the drawings we have here, the depictions we have here, it doesn't seem super compatible with the context of the neighborhood to me. The single family homes, I would be curious about other possibilities to provide more variation that would make it more compatible with single family homes in the area.
Kelly, given the concern around, specificity of direction in option 4, if the commission voted option 3, would that preclude the petitioner from representing at a later date?
So let me catch up to option 3. If you voted option 3, it will go to council for a final decision.
With that
With a negative recommendation.
Correct. So so option 3, vote if it was approved. If it was voted to be denied, then it would move forward with a recommendation to deny. Would be the way that would go. And then, so that would be on record. The conversation would be on record. The commission comments would be part of what's conveyed to the council as part of your decision. And the council would have that feedback from where you're at on why, if that was the motion, why it was recommended no.
Is my understanding, though, just from a city staff comment, that there's nothing in the PUD requirements that would require any of the changes that we're talking about based on what's on the books right now?
If it was required, it would be there now, right? So it's the interpretation of the findings of establishing the PUD is where you're at. So do you grant a level of deviations requested based on the criteria for having a PUD? Now, council required the PUD for this to even be considered. They weren't comfortable with straight zoning that had no public hearing review process. So that's why you get to see everything. I don't think there's a requirement in the PUD that's would force you to deny it. It's that interpretation of the findings. Have they achieved those findings in the spirit of that PUD? And again, I think the main things are, is the housing type enough to justify it? Is the architecture or style enough to be considered compatible? Is the living environment that's created desirable for someone as an occupant to those homes or an owner of those homes? Those are all the things you're processing as a package here for 20 townhomes.
Is the setback issue one of those requirements?
Well, they're asking for a reduction in the front yard setback from the standard. So that is one of those concerns. On the south, staff doesn't see that as a deviation because we view that as a perimeter 10-foot setback. The deck is an extra encroachment by 3 or 2.5, 3 feet. But we don't see the south. Well, one argument from the public was, yeah, it's closer to that property line. But many of the other deviations are because of the lot lines related to the townhome size. Like the lots are smaller than the code specifies for some single family attached, and they have different setbacks there. But the North Dakota front setback is yes, a requested reduction.
Mm-hmm.
Another question. If we were to make a motion to defer action, would that motion need to include some of those specifics, or would you recommend the motion include those specifics?
For it to be productive for the applicant, I think they need to understand what you would like a response to. If it was just to defer, I don't know that they could reasonably address anything. The deferral can be for no more than 30 days because it's a rezoning request, and it has to proceed to the city council within 30 days of this hearing, regardless of action by the commission. So the maximum deferral time would be effectively 1 or 2 meetings for that. So the applicant could be back at the next meeting. We would need some notice from them if that's the case. But that's the extent of the deferral that's available.
Any other discussion?
I'm not sure which direction we go with this.
And I think if you do decide to, whatever you decide to do in a recommendation, if there's some support of that motion explaining, like if you were to vote to deny, letting council know a little bit more specifically why would be helpful. If you ask for the deferral, having some clear expectations of what you'd like addressed, that's always helpful. So I just urge you in any version of this, other than alternative 1, which is self-evident, alternative 2, 3, or 4, if you could articulate some factors of why you're making that ultimately why that's the vote, that'd be helpful for everybody that's here.
I'm not sure which direction we go with this, folks. My general thought is that I support townhomes on this particular development. I do think that it matches Ames Plan 2040, despite some great feedback from here. I think that it would receive a little bit less criticism from the general public if it were slightly less dense. I don't know how that would affect a developer's bottom line or thoughts on that. Obviously, there's a reason why we're being presented with this particular site plan. So I don't know if these setbacks that we're seeing here specific to North Dakota and Lincoln Way are enough. I guess I would support if someone else wanted to make a motion, but I just don't know that I have enough personally to not support option 1 without having concrete, why do we not like this, other than we'd like it to be less dense.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add, I agree in supporting townhomes here. And yeah, this has that's made this more of a difficult decision in my mind. I think from what I've heard in our discussion here, the main considerations, if we were to defer and ask for additional information from the applicant, additional considerations from the applicant, setbacks on North Dakota, and considerations for those, yard size with the units, especially on the 4 units on the northern end of the property, design elements of the units.
Can you elaborate on the, I guess I must have missed that comment, the north 4 units yard size, what standard that's addressing?
Well, they're supposed to be 10%. Is that what it is? 10% open space?
The overall site,
The overall.
not
with
each
those
lot.
size
Not each
of lots.
Each
they're not
lot,
they're not having an access to a usable amount of open space, which makes the saying, well, we have yards, they equal 10%, kind of an argument that doesn't hold water for me.
okay.
And then consideration design of the units facing North Dakota, and how they fit the context of the neighborhood. And then landscaping preservation of trees. I'm not sure how that fits in with the beauty, but yeah, those are the concerns that are the discussion, what I've heard in the discussion at least. And if I were to make a motion to defer action, that's what it would include.
Is that specific enough?
I don't have a magic formula. I'm just urging clarity for everyone to know what to do next.
And we're failing badly.
I know.
If the commission knows what they want, I would urge you to pick option 2 or 3. If you really are not sure what you're looking for, I mean, option 1's on the table. I'm just not hearing anybody support that. That's why I skipped it. Again, if you know what you want, 2 or 3 is more advantageous for continuing the process. If you're unclear, don't know what to expect or what you want, that's where I think you pick option 4.
Just on the usable open space of those north lots, I mean, that's such a steeply sloped area. If they were expanded, don't know what usability you'd necessarily be getting, but also I'm concerned about having that retaining wall on individually owned lots there for maintenance. I'll just thought I'd throw that out.
Well, is that part of the question though? Is it, so yeah, maybe you can't expand those, but
No.
is that
I thought
reason
you
to
meant
limit the
expand.
number of lots then? I guess I think is that what people are questioning, I guess?
Yeah.
For those 4?
Whole distribution of space amongst the lots.
So is it really about the count or the space?
It's more about the space. I wouldn't be able to personally live on a lot that size. And I think a lot of people, especially if there's a kid or 2 in the house, might struggle with that.
Yeah, and I guess with that, I mean, I think there are all sorts of a spectrum of preferences for lot size and for housing types, but if we're getting to the question of the accessible open space, I think that's maybe the question that's pertinent to this discussion. Yeah.
I mean, so it sounds like if I were to summarize what we're talking about here, I don't know that we have enough specificity to do option number 4 here. I would consider maybe best case, we might go with alternative 3 and deny it, pass on the details that Matthew just outlined, and that way council has our feedback as a planning and zoning commission body of why we can't accept the proposal as it's presented here, and then council can make their ultimate recommendation based upon this conversation that we had tonight and this feedback that we heard from the general public. I don't know what others might have on thoughts on that.
I agree.
I agree.
For clarification on the process, suppose we were to recommend option 3 goes to the city council, ultimately it gets denied there. Does that preclude the developer from reapplying in the future with a modified plan?
I think the languages can't be substantially the same.
Okay.
So you can't just get this denied, then resubmit this the next day.
Right.
But how different is open to interpretation. So there's no mandatory, like you got to wait a year to come back and develop again or something like that.
Okay. So I mean that if in some way we wanted to see revisions to this plan based upon what we're seeing, that's one way to get it done, or at least to voice that we don't support the plan as proposed right in front of us right now. Okay. Matthew, I think you had some great points there. I don't know if you were writing, I was writing, but I feel like you might want to make the motion because you did the brain power for that.
Yeah, then if we're entertaining a motion, I would move to recommend alternative 3. The Planning and Zoning Commission may recommend that the City Council deny the rezoning to residential medium RM density for 113 North Dakota with a planned unit development with major site development plan and preliminary plat for the reasons of limited setbacks on North Dakota, concern about equitable yard size and access to open space throughout the development, design considerations along North Dakota that fit the context of the neighborhood, and preservation of old growth trees to the extent possible.
So sad. I second.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. All right.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. So as we said, this will move on then to the city council meeting, most likely May 13th would be the hearing date with city council.
All right. Thank you, everyone. With that one passed, we will then move on to item 8 on the agenda, commission referral of discussion, social service provider criteria.
Just looking back to see if the original author is in the audience. I do not see her. So at the last meeting, you received this correspondence and the commission chose to put it on an agenda for discussion. It's a request from the member of the public for you to consider these issues related to social service providers. It's really of whether or not the board would ever want to make a recommendation to the council for the council to take it up as an issue. Since you made this referral to put on your agenda, the council did receive the memo that I gave you as background information, and they chose at this time not to move forward with any specific considerations. But that doesn't deprive you of your ability to discuss it tonight.
And just to be clear, so this is purely discussion item. There can be no recommendations.
No, it's on the agenda. The board could take no action. The board could recommend to move it forward. The board could do whatever. It is an actionable item because it is on the agenda tonight.
Okay. So I guess, so for this item, is there city staff presenting on any of this? Or are we just having read it
not
going
presenting
forward?
anything because it's information that's provided to you from the public. So I gave you my memo. That's what I gave the council. There's been no presentation. There's no recommendation of staff on this one way or the other.
Okay.
Is this something we could expect to see from the council at some later date then?
Their action last meeting was to not specifically do anything with it.
Oh,
doesn't mean they couldn't choose to do something, but I would not expect to see that anytime soon.
It would seem like a lot of what they have listed here would already be in existence.
It is not. That's why it's
Yeah.
on the list.
So these places don't have like a standard operating procedure, these homes?
I don't know if they do or they do not. The municipal code of Ames does not tell you how to operate your facility.
Right, and should we? You know, I mean, I'm thinking I guess my question is, have they contacted these agencies and asked and had to sit down with them before they sat down and made all these huge lists? Because they might find that a lot of this would just be shared.
I can't say what the group did or did not do. I let them know last week that you had it on an agenda for discussion, but I did not hear back from that. I mean, the list was generated from the Romero House process from last fall and this winter. You understanding what one agency says doesn't mean it's enforceable or a commitment of any type. So I think that was driving the reason to generate this list is if the city adopted things of this nature, there's an enforcement mechanism.
I think my big fear as I looked at this, not fear, but it's very possible that they may already have standard operating procedures and many of these things already in place, but by making it so that it's part of a city special use permit, that means they have to submit all of this information to the city. And there are some things that are enforceable here, like making sure that staff is on site 24 hours a day and just very specific criteria. And so that's going to require a fair amount of staff time with someone checking up to ensure that these conditions are being met. That's my one feedback point on that. But
Well, it wouldn't be one size fits all either, because, you have the whole gamut of social service agencies that would be covered by this. And what would be good for Romero House might not be necessary for somebody else. Because that north neighborhood has, I don't know, there was quite a few. It seemed like there was a few dozen, or at least a couple dozen social service agencies.
No, there's not a couple.
Not that many?
No, there's
Okay, I was under the impression there were quite a few of them up there.
I believe that staff officially says there's 5 or 6 that meet the zoning code
Okay.
definition. The neighborhood would classify other things in that category and increase that number.
That may be why I was
But there-
thinking of
in
a
any
number.
in any count, there were not dozens.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I think a lot of the things listed here in a vacuum, I think could be reasonable. But yeah, I think collectively, I imagine there's a lot of social service providers, like you just said, Mike, that a lot of these might not fit super well. But also similar to what you said, Julie, it would just, I think this would put a pretty high burden on a lot of these organizations that are already often nonprofits and might be relying a lot on, minimal staff, a lot of volunteers, things like that.
I mean, even the ADA compliance that I saw here could be fairly burdensome for a nonprofit that's citing an older building in this area. So
Well, it could be burdensome for the city. Having a large list to have to select from for each different.
Yeah.
I didn't listen in or attend the April 8th council meeting where decision was made. What was I guess, can we talk about what some of the reasons were that the council chose not to move forward with
It wasn't on an agenda. It was a non-agenda communication.
Okay.
So they received a memo from staff and then they chose not to do anything more after receiving that memo.
Okay.
So there weren't council remarks explaining
Okay.
or pontificating about it.
Well, if we wouldn't have a real clear direction we wanted to go with these, I would think we would probably want to file these for the time being, and should the subject come up again with the council.
Yeah, the commission you don't have to take any action.
Right.
If there's no action, there's no action.
Yeah. I will say one aspect of the proposal that was mentioned in your memo here was special use permit renewals. And I just wanted to speak to that. I think there are situations where it would make sense to have some kind of renewal process, especially if where special use permits are approved by the Board of Adjustment, with considerations or requirements for how a location, business, whatever it might be, operates in the context of the neighborhood. If that location ceases to operate in that same way with the context of the neighborhood, I think it makes sense for there to be some kind of renewal process.
You're talking just generally, not
Just
specific
generally,
to
not
this. Yep.
not specifically for this proposal, but yeah, just sort of my thoughts about renewals for special use permits generally.
Is it done on a complaints basis now? That if someone has actually pulled a special use permit, that if someone complains saying there's a violation there, then that would be enforced one way or another?
Renewal is a little bit different than code enforcement. So the permit that's approved by the board, they must conform to that permit. If they don't, they're subject to citation and correction under the municipal code. If there was a pattern of non-compliance, the hearing to revoke the permit can be held. But that would take like a pattern of disobedience, basically. A renewal, the assumption is it goes away and you have to prove that you get to keep going.
Higher standard. Okay.
Yeah. And that is not something I believe that is really founded in land use practice to, let's say you built a new building for $3 million and your permit's good for 2 years. You're never going to build that building because you don't know that you get to use it after 2 years.
Right.
Now, if you get your permit and you're, again, disobeying it, that's your own fault for not being compliant. If you're revoked, you're revoked. That's just how it works.
And can the Board of Adjustment give specific requirements with approval of a special use permit for?
They can. So there's general criteria. They're very general. It's part of the reason this group proposed this. So the board, if they want to attach a condition to the permit that relates to any of the criteria, they can do that. But I think the thought of the group was that you're really relying on a 5-member board to come up with what should be addressed. Now there's public participation, there's public comments, but the criteria are very general right now.
For the proposal more generally, I would just say, my last thought, if the city council did want to pursue something related to requirements for social service providers, especially in residential neighborhoods, I think I'd be open to that, but I would probably think something pared down and that more broadly applies to different types of social service providers. Otherwise, I don't have any other thoughts or comments.
Okay. If there's no motion, then you can move on to the next agenda item.
All right. Does anyone have a motion? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, commission comments. Do we have any commission comments?
Who wants to say it? Is there going to be a meeting in early May?
I don't remember. Seems really far away. It's 2 weeks away. Probably. Yes. There's one item that I believe will be coming at least.
I will not be here that first meeting in May.
Yeah.
And I will not either. So you better be here. We'll figure it out either way.
So with that note, Eileen, let's confirm quorum as soon as possible for that meeting. Otherwise, we need to find probably a different date.
I will literally be out of the country, so I will not be here.
And again, if anytime you cannot attend in person, under state law, we have to make available remote access if you're wanting or willing to do that.
Although it didn't work out well when I first came on the commission that one time.
Yeah. So if
when I tried to
you're not obligated, I mean, you're out of the country. I'm not saying you have to, but
Yeah,
if you're
I will be out of the
homesick or
country.
something and you just don't feel like you can make it, but you're willing to participate remotely, remember, we have the ability and we're obligated to make that available to you under state law now.
Here's hoping they let you back in.
Yeah, maybe they won't, and I'll just have to stay in a beautiful paradise.
All right. Any staff comments?
Yes, so I gave you a little hint there. So
Yeah.
last night, City Council held a workshop about the process and interests of proceeding with a comprehensive update of the zoning ordinance. So they voted to move ahead with that. Last night, they accepted a general list of implementation measures of 2040 to be addressed. There's also an understanding of other development issues that regularly come up that would get updated, landscaping, parking, things along those lines, because it's going to be a comprehensive update. The intent, why I brought this up mostly for you tonight, is their motion back to us. I have to go back with a formal scope of work, identifies a lot of things that are going to happen and when, so they can approve that. But they're interested in formulation of a version of an advisory committee that may or may not interact or be somehow combined with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So we presented two options. One was to create an advisory committee through like an application process or something, and they would have the sole purpose of meeting 12 to 15 times to work with staff on issues related to drafting the ordinance, or use the commission, which is a standing body and has that similar function, I should say, under state law. Eventually you have to make a recommendation on whatever's proposed. So they talked about that back and forth. So they asked for us to look at how an advisory committee could be created and how that interacts with the commission. The thought was, if you were the body, you're not getting more assignments, we would use your regular meeting times to bring that material to you. So maybe the advisory committee has a different meeting date or time. So look out for that. We'll talk about that. But at this point in time, it doesn't appear that this body will be the sole advisory element to the zoning ordinance update. And then the third part, kind of a style question. So it's not just the topics and standards that go in there. It's not just about how do you gain public input and give people a chance to look at drafts and refine them. The ultimate product, what does that look like, drives some of these things. So council would like us to pursue what we call the Unified Development Code. So the issues will not just be zoning. The subdivision code must be updated as well. So at a minimum, the subdivision code and the zoning ordinance are going to kind of be merged together. The thought process there is it's more useful. Let's say you're a residential project. It's slightly more useful to have an integrated expectations of standards about doing a residential project. Right now, the zoning ordinance is all the things about the site, but if you're going to do a subdivision or public facility improvements, you go to a different chapter, and then you got to kind of relate back and make sure that they're coordinated. Now they're supposed to be, but at times they're not. So the idea is if we do a unified development code, it can possibly be more usable, possibly reader friendly. So that's the direction we're going to go. My opinion was to do that until we decide it doesn't work. And there are some pitfalls to this approach, but we won't know them until we start to get into it. So I think probably be at least a month, maybe not till June, until council gets that formal work plan proposal and timeline back to them. And then at that point, we'll make a selection of when to start that. It's easily going to be an 18-month process. The intent is to do it all at one time. Eventually, that's also going to then lead to map amendments. Some of these things are going to be new zoning districts that don't exist. You heard about urban corridor tonight. We don't have an implementing zone. When you read Plan 2040, one of the first implementation measures is write a zoning district for urban corridor. The existing zones were never meant to do what that zoning district is. So that's a good example of an implementation measure that needs to be done. And there's some other ones in there too. So it's going to be a lot to go through, but you're going to have a pretty interesting 1.5 to 2 years. of working through some of these issues at times. And again, if you're not the advisory committee, you won't see it every meeting. If you're somehow worked into that process, you'll see it on a more regular basis. Any questions about what's coming or what it's about or why we're doing it? Happy to answer them right now. I didn't bore you with the presentation. It goes all about the steps of the process, and there's no material content or expectations there that we needed direction on. Very excited group, I can tell.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That's the end of my comments.
All right. Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There we go.